Well, why don't we get started? We got a very full agenda today. Um, for those of you who are new to this event, my name is Dan Press. I'm the uh, General Counsel for the Campaign for Trauma-Informed Policy and Practice. And CTIPP is Campaign for Trauma-Informed Policy and Practice. CTIPP CAN is CTIPP Community Advocacy Network. And we started these monthly calls for two reasons. One is to let those of you working on trauma-informed programs all over the country know what's going on in Congress about trauma-informed legislation. And secondly, to encourage you to get to know your Congress people and your senators, educate them about trauma science, let them know about the great trauma-informed work going on in their district or state, because right now Congress is woefully behind in putting trauma science to work and continuing to put money into programs to deal with a host of problems that we know don't work unless you add a trauma element, but it's been a long, slow process getting information to them. And the best people to do that are you, the people in their districts, in their state. So the first purpose of these calls is to motivate you really to become involved in the legislative process and also in your state and local legislative processes. And our first presenter will be Jesse Kohler from CTIPP, who will be talking about the CTIPP campaign to recruit people to educate Congress. The second reason for these purpose of these calls are to have presentations on innovative trauma-informed programs being implemented around the country, or discussions of topics of relevance involving trauma. And today we couldn't have a more timely call. Our subject for today's call is trauma and climate change. And we're being reminded over and over again that climate change is not only real, but can create a huge amount of trauma. We're going to have two speakers. One of the things we've been advocating with Congress is to include money in the trauma in the COVID legislation to help deal with the post-pandemic trauma that we know is going to hit the schools and other sectors. And one of the things we've cited regularly is a successful program that Houston implemented after Hurricane Harvey, where they had the teachers in all the schools in Houston educated about trauma science and prepared them for dealing with the trauma the kids were going to bring back to them. It was a successful program, and it really serves as a model for what we've been asking Congress to fund. And we're fortunate enough to have Janet Parmentier, who ran the program in Houston, going to do a short presentation on what they did and how it could serve as a model for programs around the country. And then our main speaker is Bob Dopplet, who has been the foremost voice on encouraging, is that the right word, Bob? Encouraging or haranguing the country to implement programs to deal with the trauma that climate change is and will continue to prevent.
All right, I'll pick out a book for you.
So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Jesse to talk about getting all of you involved in educating Congress about trauma. Jesse?
Thanks, Dan. So in the chat, I just put a toolkit that I'm going to be referring to, at least for the beginning of my short time to speak with you all. I will also share my screen just for ease. So we want to call attention to referring folks to engaging with this toolkit and reaching out to your representative and your 2 senators to promote a trauma-informed response ultimately to the COVID-19 pandemic. We have a number of policy requests, some background for you here, and then the variety of steps to take. So as best as possible, we try to spell out what you all would need to do with this document. It's 6 pages, and we don't want for you to get overwhelmed, which is the main purpose of walking you all through it. So if you are to do one thing with this toolkit, and you don't want to read through all of this extra background and information, there is a template email that you can send to your 2 senators, as well as a template email that you can send to your representative. They're by and large the very same, with very similar requests. And so just to walk you through how we are trying to engage folks and advocate for a trauma-informed response to this pandemic. Like Dan said, Congress has not acted, but we still want to put pressure. We still want to educate people and let Congress people know how important it is to develop a trauma-informed response during this time. And it sets the ground to educate them and inform their decisions moving forward. So we want to equip communities and community-based entities, such as schools and early education settings, to raise awareness about trauma and its effect, recognize and respond to trauma, and fully leverage flexible federal funds to ensure the best outcomes. There are specific examples of each of those beneath. And then we also want to include provisions in the next COVID package to allow federal funds to be spent on addressing trauma and building resiliency, and offer federal level coordination to support of the use of those funds. And there are, again, specific examples of ways that senators and representatives would be able to do that. And so if you were to just go to your senators or your representative's website, if you already have a relationship with either the congressperson themselves or more likely one of their staff members, you can simply send this email to them. Please recognize that there are a few spaces where we ask for you to, sort of self-identify, talk about your organization or yourself, why this is important to you. But more or less, you can just take this template and send it to that person. If you don't have a contact, you can go to their website, and there are spaces where you can just send them a message on their website, and that would be the best way to go about doing this. So again, the toolkit itself, I just put in the chat, and if there are any questions, I will put my email, and feel free to reach out to me to ask any further clarification questions. Having more people communicating these requests and calls to action to your elected officials is increasingly important as we work toward our end goal of comprehensive trauma-informed legislation. The second thing that I will say before I get off my soapbox is how important it is. We have a unique opportunity here with the group that is assembled once a month in these calls, and we hope that you keep coming back to the CTIPP CAN calls. These are always so informative. I'm looking forward to hearing from Bob and Janet today. But each of you has a power to speak to your congressman or woman as a constituent and let them know how important trauma-informed and resilience-focused initiatives like this are. We are on a long path toward developing comprehensive federal legislation that we hope changes the way that, sorry, I'm just seeing that. Thank you, Melissa, for sharing the toolkit. We're on a long path toward creating a comprehensive vision for our country, which we hope changes the way that our systems act and operate with each other. And we need your support, your network support. And so once I am done speaking here, and I will give it back to Dan, you are all the best advocates that we could ask for with your representatives and your senators. So we ask that if you haven't already done so, please sign up for the National Trauma Campaign. Get the word out to others about the National Trauma Campaign to sign up as well. It's a function where the more people we have, there are strength in numbers. The louder our collective voices are, and the better we will be able to move forward toward our ultimate goal and vision. And so with that, I just wanted to say how grateful I am always to be a part of these calls with you all. Hopefully getting to work with you all in the National Trauma Campaign and utilizing your networks as leaders to help engage other folks so that we can continue to grow our base and make our voices louder and stronger. So I'll put that in the chat, and as well as the website to find the trauma campaign. I'll put that in the chat as well. So thank you, Dan, for the time.
Thank you, Jesse. As Jesse indicated, our long-term goal is to have trauma science be incorporated in every federal program, because we know the relationship between trauma and substance abuse, trauma and education, dropouts, trauma and obesity, trauma and diabetes. So that's our long-term goal. We know that ACEs costs the United States over $700 billion a year, according to the World Health Organization. So we can save lives, we can save money, but it's only going to happen if we have an educated Congress. And as Jesse indicated, you're the ones who can do that education the best. One other plug is the next 3 months, our CTIPP CAN calls are going to really touch on critical issues that the nation is dealing with. In October, our call is going to focus on trauma and police reform. In November, it's going to focus on trauma and peer counseling, which is becoming more and more critical as the number of practitioners in the therapeutic area are diminishing. And in December, we're going to talk about trauma and racial inequality. So these are some of the big issues the country is wrestling with. Trauma has an important role to play in all of them. So we hope you'll join us for our future calls. Let me introduce our next speaker, who may not be on yet. She was going to get on at 2:15, but I'll introduce her anyway.
You just got me, Dan.
Okay. Hi, Janet.
Hi.
Life is full of serendipity. And as I mentioned, we've been bragging up the Houston program for about 6 months, but we really had no information on it other than one newspaper article we found. And then on a call that Carrie Sippel put together of Southeast Regional Trauma-Informed participants and coordinators, we noticed there was somebody on the call from Texas. And I said, do you happen to know who in Texas ran the Houston program or could connect us? And Janet popped up and said, yeah, that's me. So that was like a needle in the haystack, but she has just been a great resource, and we want to welcome you. And Janet, go ahead, and why don't you tell people about what you guys did in Houston?
Oh, thank you so much, Dan, for that great introduction. I'm just so excited to be here, and I'm going to share my screen with you guys because I was able to do a PowerPoint on this a while back after the storm. Everything had ended with the storm, and we were able to share what had happened with the folks at UNICEF, who actually were the ones who enabled us to have the response that we did. So I'll just tell you briefly, you know, I at the time was the founding director of the Center for School Behavioral Health at Mental Health America Greater Houston. We did a lot bringing together nonprofit providers and advocates with our school districts to help infuse behavioral health services and education in our schools. And we did that through a number of different ways. You see the little pillars there. But our goal was really to change our systems so that the whole mental health of children was in the forefront rather than hiding in the shadows. And so much has happened since we started that effort back in 2014. But that is a story for another day. And the reason I'm telling you about that is because one of our strong connections at the time, and still today, was with our City of Houston Mayor's Office through their Department of Education. So here comes Harvey in 2017. These particular pictures are very meaningful to me personally, because if you see the picture on the left where it says, that has the street sign, the stop sign, those two streets are right where I grew up as a child. And so my childhood neighborhood was literally underwater. And the same with the picture on the right, that was very close to where I grew up as well. And what I really especially love about that picture, especially looking at it now 3 years later in what's happening with our country where we're talking about racial issues, is the diversity of the City of Houston, where you see this Caucasian man is carrying the Asian woman and her baby to safety. We are actually, believe it or not, the most diverse city in the United States. So, but we're also the most, we're the fourth largest city in the United States, and we're known as the center for oil, and our medical center is the largest in the world, et cetera, et cetera. So we have a lot going for us. And we think we're pretty cool because we are from Texas, and everybody knows that in Texas, everything is bigger and better. And Texans were once their own country. Texas was once its own country. So Texans, have big heads, literally big hair for our women. And I can say all this because I'm a native Houstonian and native Texan. But at the time of Harvey, we were literally underwater, and we became, well, I have to say, it felt like we were a third world country. So at first, when I was called by the mayor's office to see if I would come to a meeting with the folks from UNICEF about helping us with the psychosocial recovery for our children from Harvey, as the rain was still falling, my first thought was, wait, we're Houston, what is UNICEF here for? And my second thought was, we're Houston and we need UNICEF. And they came, and that was through, as I explained to Dan on a private conversation, through personal connections that somebody in our city had with the UNICEF folks. And they came to Houston to help us. And that's why I have that white knight on the horse image, because they literally did that for us. In 3 days, that picture of the kitchen table, we sat around my kitchen table and divided, with the 4 or 5 people from UNICEF and 4 or 5 people from Houston. And we came up with a plan and sent a proposal into UNICEF. And 2 weeks later, any of you who work in the nonprofit field, I'm a longtime nonprofit professional, you write a proposal and then you wait, 2, 3, 6 months, whatever. And then maybe you're funded, hopefully, and maybe you're not. 2 weeks, less than 2 weeks later, we hear back from UNICEF USA, here's some money, and do what you said you were going to do in your plan. And this is what we decided to do. We have this wonderful collaboration between the City of Houston and our Center for School Behavioral Health at Mental Health and UNICEF USA. And we developed 3 components to our response. One was being able to train all of our educators in trauma-informed classroom strategies and mindfulness. We worked with a local mindfulness expert, Dr. Ann Friedman, and she co-facilitated the trainings with us. What we did is a train the facilitator type of module, where we would train 2 people from each school campus, and those 2 people in turn would go back and train all of the rest of the faculty at their particular campus, which is a lovely, lovely model, and you can get to a lot of people. But in our largest, we have over 30 something school districts just in the Houston area, and 60 in the surrounding areas, which is all considered part of Houston. And in our largest school district, Houston independent school district, we have 280 schools. And so to try and even just do one of those school districts, we cover over 1 million children in our school district areas throughout the city and the county area. It wasn't going to be slow to get everybody trained like we wanted. And so you see number 3 down there, we also worked with Cognito to develop an online mental health training, which I'll tell you about in a moment. But we also worked with the Trauma and Grief Center at Texas Children's Hospital. They are experts, they're part of the National Child Traumatic Stress Network, to bring trauma-informed therapeutic group sessions to kids who were still struggling 6 to 8 weeks after the storm had ended. The Cognito folks were amazing to work with. We had already had a partnership with them. They had developed a mental health simulation, and so we worked with them with 2 nationally known educators. One was Dr. Marlene Wong, she's an expert in trauma, and then also Dr. Julie Kaplow, who was with our, Dr. Wong is in California, Dr. Kaplow is the one with our Trauma and Grief Center. And we worked with a number of educators to develop specially designed training in trauma for people to access online. If you have never seen Cognito before, I encourage you to go to their website. It's not like the online trainings that most teachers go to, where there's 18 minutes, it's a narrated static PowerPoint, and they turn it on, they go and grade papers, they come back 18 minutes later and they check something off and they get, okay, I did this. That is not what we need, because nobody's learning anything. And we really needed these people to understand what children were going to be coming back to school with, what behaviors were going to be showing, so how they can deal with it and understand it and not come with punitive approaches, but come with trauma-informed approaches to that. And so this was the way we could do that. This simulation is amazing because you take the role of the educator, and then the avatars are the kids. They're both avatars, and you have dialogues, and you get to guess, you get to select what you say. The kid responds. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not. And when it's not so good, a counselor avatar will pop up and say, you didn't do that so well. Why don't you try this instead? And so you really learn how to have conversations with kids in a very trauma-informed way. And again, I encourage you to go. You can see some demonstrations on their website. It's pretty awesome. It's been a lifesaver. It was able to help us reach so many more. And as of this time now, almost 3 years later, over 50,000 educators have been trained on the online version of the Cognito. We took this model, we were invited by UNICEF to take this model to Puerto Rico after Maria, and we also went to Florida after Hurricane Michael. And of course, stand by ready for any other community in the wake of a storm that just arrived again today, and then Laura a couple of weeks ago. And just to kind of close off, we recognize that nearly 3 million people in this southeastern part of the state of Texas, 3 million children were affected by Hurricane Harvey. And what we also know, as you guys know, being in ACEs people, that the greatest toll was on mental health. And I'm going to stop there and stop sharing. Because I think that here we are again, of course, lots of storms and the fires, and I know Bob is going to be educating all of us in that incredible information we all need to hear. But COVID alone, we've, all these kids are going back to school now, and the need is greater more now than ever to make sure that all of our educators have training in trauma-informed practices. Thank you. Carrie?
Hey, so my big question, Janet, it's so good to see you, was there any way to tell what the outcomes were of this training, how resilient the students were, how quickly people got back into being able to learn again, to regulate and get back to learning, versus the people who didn't have this? Any comparative analysis or anything?
That's a great question. At the time that we were doing this, as you might imagine, we ended up having 2 jobs, our regular jobs, plus we called our Harvey jobs. And because our grant did have, we were wanting to measure the impact of the training, we were able to follow, we did pre, post, and follow-up tests with everybody who came through the training. So we have the data on the people who went through the training and how it impacted them. And yes, it's all great stuff. And I think I shared it with you, Carrie, and I think I shared it with you, Dan, also, what we found. But I don't believe we have anything more than 6-month follow-up, and we don't have it was not a gold standard type of study where we had a control group and a treatment group. We are very small staff at the center. There were just 4 of us, and we did not have the capacity to have a larger study. But I would love to see something like that going forward. I think it's so important. And I think anybody who has done any trauma-informed training for educators has found that those who go through the trauma-informed training do so far better than anyone who is not going through it. And the effects on the kids, you can't even measure how that can be a lifelong impact, really, if they have a trauma-informed or a non-trauma-informed educator in their lives. Thank you.
I'd love to have more questions, but we need to turn Bob loose at 2:30. But just 2 comments. One, something that Janet told me, which really had an impact on me, which was that the worst trauma hit 18 months after the disaster, not right after. Can you talk about that for a second?
Sure. Some of the folks who've studied the effects of trauma have found that you can have significant effects anywhere from right after the trauma to up to 3 years after, or even longer. But for some people, there's kind of a midway mark around 18 months where it can get really bad for a lot of people. And what we found with our school districts is, like, the storm hit right at the beginning of the school year. People were back in school within a week or 2, most of them. And you would expect that it would be a horrible year and the kids would do really bad on their state mandated tests, but that didn't happen because everybody rallied and everybody said, we're going to do this. It's going to be a great year. And everybody was very positive and everybody worked overtime and the kids did okay on the state testing at the end of the year. Who would have thought, right? And they didn't report too many behavioral problems either. The following year, 2018, 2019, if you asked some of the principals of these schools, how's it going? They'll go, what happened? We made it through last year and it's like the bomb fell this year. And so sure enough, that people were having those delayed reactions. It was really, because, you may still be out of your house or you may never go back to the house you were at. You may have, lost all of your friends from your former community and had to adjust to that. People's livelihoods, just like now, again, with COVID, a lot of people had issues with employment. And there was, you could really see it coming in around midway through that whole process. So again, something to keep in mind during COVID, and also all of the different climate related scenarios. So it's just so god awful happening right now as well.
You can do this in your neighborhood too. There's no reason why you can't lobby your LEA or your state education. And Janet, would you be willing to put your email address in the chat box so
Absolutely.
people can contact you?
Absolutely, would love to hear from everybody. Thank
I'd love
you
to
so
have
much.
you. Yeah. I am now, Janet, this is wonderful. Hopefully you'll become a regular, and I'd like to kick it over to Bob Dopplet. Bob is, if this were 1,000 years ago, they'd call Bob a seer or a prophet. He has been talking about the need to address the trauma caused by climate change for years and years. He's the author of a book called Transformational Resilience: How Building Human Resilience for Climate Disruption Can Safeguard Society and Increase Well-Being. Bob is the executive director of the Resource Innovation Group and a board member of CTIPP. And Bob, take it away.
Well, thank you, Dan, and thank you, everyone. Can you all hear me fine? It's coming across okay. I do coordinate the International Transformational Resilience Coalition, and I'll talk in a second about why we call it that. We like these really snappy terms that just flow out of your mouth, but ITRC is for short. We came together about 8 years ago after I was involved with building climate response policies on the East Coast, and Superstorm Sandy came along, and we saw the mental health problems skyrocket. And realized that there wasn't a focus on these issues, and it's very, very important. So we've been trying to build awareness of the need to get out front of the mental health and psychosocial impacts of climate change for going on 8 years now, and now we're focused on how to institutionalize this response by developing some good policies. So that's what I want to talk about today. Okay, why won't this change? So it is very difficult to talk about and to get our heads around, but we have to understand that we are in the midst of a civilization changing event. We think about the one-time disasters from Hurricane Harvey to the wildfires that are happening out on the West Coast, including the one in Eugene, Oregon, outside of Eugene, Oregon, that I've been impacted by. But we're actually in the midst of a civilization changing event. There's now a 20% chance that within 4 years, by 2024, we're going to see global temperatures rise above the 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit threshold that many scientists believe will activate irreversible impacts. And if it doesn't occur then, hopefully it doesn't, it's going to occur soon afterwards. Under the current emissions path, and we're actually, global emissions are going up, not down, even with the pandemic, we're going to see abrupt collapses of ecosystems and what scientists call catastrophic biodiversity loss within this decade. And it's going to start in the tropical oceans and move north. And so we have to get our heads around what's happening, understand it, come to grips with it, and realize that that means we have very little time remaining to help people get prepared emotionally and psychologically for what's coming our way. So one of the impacts is more extreme, frequent, extreme, and prolonged disasters like Harvey, like Sally that we're seeing now, like Laura, Hurricane Laura, and like the wildfires that are going on across the West. But there are flooding and heat waves and droughts going on all over the world now and in the US. And just here in the US, each year, 47 million Americans experience extreme storms, wildfires, heat waves, and other disasters. And that number will at least double by 2050. My guess is, based on the science I've seen, it's going to be way more than that. And we're seeing far more increases of these kind of impacts worldwide. And as we all know, 20 to 50% of the people who are directly impacted can experience pretty significant mental health problems, often because of the stages of disasters that we just heard about. They show up months or even a year or two after the impact. And you can see that there'll be windstorms, heat waves, storm surges, heat level droughts, et cetera, et cetera. And equally important, the disasters are intermixed with continual what we call toxic stress pileups. These accumulation of stresses from having to put your life back together and get a new job, build your home up, find new sources of income, find food and water, et cetera. And these toxic stress pileups affect everyone, not just a few people. Everyone is affected by them because of the cascading disruptions that we're seeing to ecological, social, and economic systems. Much like the pandemic created these kind of cascading disruptions, so will climate change. And with climate change, what we're adding on top of this is these disasters. So those stresses are going to relate to job and income losses, food and water and power shortages, illnesses and diseases, loss of place, our culture, our natural environment, disruption of the social support networks that are critical to us, involuntary migration and in-migration to people coming into your community that puts more pressure on the community. We're seeing more stress-related and disaster-related crime, aggression, and violence go up, intensified racism, sexism, and other systemic oppressions. People are will continually worry about their future and their children's future. And just as importantly, there's stresses resulting from the having to make many societal changes required to reduce the climate emergency to manageable levels. So we're seeing all of these kind of impacts grow. So here's just an overview of the combination of accelerating disasters and the toxic stress pileups on both mental and physical health, on community safety and well-being, and on climate solutions. And I'll talk about that in a second, but that is really vital. So we see here, as we hear about and from disasters, but it's also with these toxic stress pileups, severe anxiety and depression's growing, PTSD, complicated grief, vicarious trauma, seeing it from afar. In other words, compassion fatigue for those of us, all of you working on these issues, increased suicidal ideation, and probably the most important of all is the hopelessness that we're seeing our members, ITRC members, see growing across the world, because when people feel hopeless, they think nothing really matters in terms of how you treat yourself or how you treat others. It doesn't matter. And that can lead to lots of personal mental health and or psychosocial problems. And the psychosocial problems include, we're seeing relationship breakdowns and problems, spousal abuse and more ACEs, child abuse, drug and alcohol and tobacco abuse as people try to self-anesthetize themselves or cope with these issues. As I said, racism and other systemic oppressions, crime and violence and aggression. We get community and societal trauma and collective hopelessness. Both of those lead to that stress can greatly increase the physical illnesses and diseases. The medical profession really doesn't quite accept that or understand that as much. We've run lots of workshops for physicians who understand it, but are not trained in how to deal with those issues, so they give out medication. But also rising costs to families and businesses and governments. And all of that adds to fear-based reactions that cause people to retreat into a self-protective survival mode. We all know that that happens. And that leaves people less interested in external issues like reducing greenhouse gas emissions, especially if it might raise costs of gasoline or other sorts of things that affect people. So it actually affects our ability to limit the climate crisis to manageable levels. We get this vicious cycle going on of people retreating into a self-protected survival mode that makes it more difficult to address the climate crisis, which adds to the mental health and psychosocial problems. But despite these threats, we have really failed to prepare people, individuals, families, organizations, and our communities for the traumas and toxic stress pileups speeding our way. But all of you on the line here watching this presentation and the people in the mental health and social service field really have a key leadership role to play. This isn't for the climate activists to work on per se only. We have a very important role to play because of the mental health and psychosocial impacts associated with climate change. But to make that change and really become effective, we really have to rethink and redefine how mental health and psychosocial problems. That's what our members have seen. And by the way, the ITRC has now grown over the 8 years. We have members all over the US, many in Canada, many in Europe, some in Africa, some in Australia, New Zealand, and other places. So that's what we're basing this information on, is with the feedback and information and research they keep sending to us. But when climate adversity, we have to understand that climate adversities are going to continue and accelerate for decades, maybe 100 years. So personal and family and community distress are going to be ongoing and have no resolution, no fix or closure, which is what we've normally thought about and structured our mental health programs around. And for many people, it's going to be ruptured meaning in life, which, as I said before, will cause many people, millions, to feel hopeless, or what we call spiritual distress, which again is at the root of many mental health and psychosocial problems. And therefore, many people are going to show symptoms of anxiety, depression, grief, anger, aggression that we normally say, oh, this person could use some mental health assistance. But these are going to be normal reactions to very sick external conditions, not necessarily psychological.
No, I just mean it's hard for me.
Somebody needs to go on mute there if you would. These are going to be normal reactions to sick conditions.
No, I enjoy lunch.
Not necessarily
I
psychological.
enjoy lunch very well. That wasn't meant to be.
Dustin, you need to go on mute. Dustin, you need to go on mute. Thank you.
So in addition to really rethinking what we mean by mental health and psychosocial problem, we need to redefine how to prevent and heal mental health and psychosocial problems. The clinical treatment programs we've all been trained in. I'm trained as a mental health therapist. Our direct service programs and our disaster mental health programs only reach a small amount of people, and only those that typically show symptoms of pathology in some way. They do not provide the ongoing social supports and connections that are vital for mental wellness and resilience in ongoing disasters and toxic strep pileups. We don't go home with people and spend time with them after they leave our office and help them deal with these issues. And as you know, many people see therapy in these programs as only for the mentally impaired or weak, as a luxury for the rich, or they conflict with their religious or spiritual beliefs, or they just fear being stigmatized by being involved with them. And so people don't engage, but they also don't, our clinical treatment and direct service programs don't change unhealthy, unsafe, and unjust cultural norms, which play a major role in influencing the thinking and responses people have to adversities. And they don't change the social narratives and the messages people hear from their media, from their friends, from leaders in their community that create and reinforce those norms. And they don't build the group and community strengths needed to prevent mental health and psychosocial spiritual problems. So we have to understand that what we've found looking around the world with the members are engaged, that our members are engaged in these issues, is that our approach to mental health and psychosocial supports were set up for very different conditions, and they're now insufficient for what I call the trauma scene, which we're now really entering. Constant traumas of all kinds. We need to rethink and develop a new vision and a new approach. And this new thinking must shift from pathologizing people to enhancing population level capacity for mental wellness and resilience. That means everybody needs assistance to enhance their capacity for mental wellness and resilience, not just those who show symptoms of pathology. And doing this will greatly reduce the number of people needing treatment. We're still going to need mental health treatments and psychosocial supports, but we need to really focus on prevention first as a way to reduce the number that need that kind of assistance. So here's some basics. I like what Pauline Boss, some of you may know Pauline up at University of Minnesota. She works on issues very similar to what, if you take out what she works on and put in climate change, you'd see they're exactly the same. But the antidote to anguish is sheer connectedness. I think we all know that. When distress is caused by external factors that have no endpoint, no resolution, no cure, the priority must be to build resilience, to push back against those external factors, those stressors, not diagnosing and treating symptoms. Because everyone is going to be impacted as the climate emergency worsens. We need to build population level resilience. That is, all adults and all youth need mental wellness and resilience building skills and information, not just individually focused approaches. And when people experience continual distress, and I'm not telling you anything you all don't know, they need their families, their friends, their faith, their spirituality community, their recreation group, peer group, and others, their community to provide emotional support and help them find meaning and hope in life. Next slide. So a few more basics. What we've found and what I think all you know is when people develop good resiliency skills and connections with others, good connections, they can hold their distress in different ways that allows them to function well and find new sources of meaning, purpose, and hope in their lives. So what we're not talking about taking steps that allow people to overcome their distress. That is, it goes away. As climate change worsens, we're all going to feel different kinds of distress. But we need to help people develop the skills to hold it in ways that still allow them to function well and find meaning, purpose, and hope in their lives. David Pollack, one of our ITRC steering committee members, sent a quote a couple of months ago. It said, when such skills are widely disseminated within the community, their impact is comparable to that of vaccines. In this case, they serve to increase personal and collective resilience that reduce the risk of mental health and psychosocial problems and help heal those that occur. So building population level mental wellness and resilience is basically the vaccine needed, just like we need a physical vaccine for COVID. We need this kind of mental wellness and resilience building skills and information to serve as the vaccine for the traumas associated with the climate emergency. Next slide, please. What do we mean by resilience? The ITRC. This is from a Walsh, who also has some great work in the family trauma field. A crisis can be a wake-up call, heightening attention to important matters, an opportunity for reappraisal of life priorities and pursuits, and greater investments in meaningful relationships. So beyond coping and problem solving, that's not what we're talking about. That's a baseline. Resilience involves positive transformation and growth. And that's why we use the term transformational resilience in the ITRC's name and our work, the International Transformational Resilience Coalition, because we need to help people learn skills, learn information, make social connection, and in other ways, really help them use climate adversities as catalysts for positive learning, growth, and change. And again, that's why we call this transformational resilience, not bouncing back to where people were before. That's not a very helpful concept. We could talk about that in question and answers when it comes to climate change. Next slide. So about almost a year ago now, we started to say we've been running workshops, conferences, webinars, working all over the country, trying to raise awareness of these issues, train people. We're on lots of the trainer programs, mostly for private groups now. But we then realized we need to develop policies at the state, local, and federal levels to really support this, and internationally. And so the goals of the policy I'm now going to dive into have three goals. One is to give everyone means to manage their distress so they feel they can have some influence over their situation. We call this presencing, allowing people to learn skills and information to bring them back into the present moment enough that they can make wise and skillful decisions. But that's not enough. We also need to help everyone find ways to learn and grow and find new sources of meaning, direction, and hope in life in the midst of these ongoing adversities. We call this purposing skills. So presencing and purposing. And thirdly, the policy goal is to help communities create a local culture of mental wellness and resilience by institutionalizing the practices and policies in local organizations and local policies. So how do we develop this policy framework? First, we're affiliated with Willamette University in Oregon, and we have a bunch of grad students that work for us. That's our staff for the most part. So we spent many, many months in examining federal and state and local mental wellness and resilience building policies and the local initiatives happening on the ground that many of you are involved with or lead in both urban and rural communities. And you can read the ones we looked at, lots of ACEs programs and other programs. The San Francisco Neighborhood Empowerment Program is one of the best to look at, for example. We examined also international family, community, disaster, trauma treatment, and resilience building approaches and policies. This is really where we found some of the most interesting one. I would say the best one we saw that can apply to climate change is the Israeli Trauma Coalition's community resilience center approach. Spent lots of time talking to Tali, their director, and their staff, and many other international programs. What we found is, as you're all involved with these, many successful approaches that can help deal with these issues, but of course, almost none are focused on the climate emergency. They're focused on issues that appeared in your communities. The Neighborhood Empowerment Program is building resilience at the neighborhood level for earthquakes, because it's San Francisco. You folks are dealing, many of you on the line are dealing with ACEs, because you saw ACEs emerge in your community. So, but we took the key elements of these approaches that we saw around the world, wove them together to form the policy. We also put together a team of 20 mental wellness and resilience building professionals, mostly from the US, but some from Canada and some from Europe. And they made comments, offered edits. Sometimes we got it back and thoroughly edited by people. So that's how this came about, a real thorough look. And one of the best summaries that was developed by Dr. Jack Sauls up in New York. And he put this together based on his work and others' work at post-war Kosovo, Israeli terrorism, post 9/11 New York, and elsewhere. So how to promote community resilience. And it starts with the fact that you identify and cultivate individual, family, and community strength. That's very different than starting by focusing on symptoms of pathology. And with support and encouragement, you assume that they can access their strengths and solve their problems and focus on and foster positive strengths. And so what they define community resilience is the capacity of a community to overcome shared trauma and adversity via social cohesion, mutual support, hope, which is critical, and the presence of community narratives, those social narratives that give people the experience of meaning and hope. And it involves a collaborative approach. People within the communities are engaged as participants from planning to implementation. It's not the mental health professionals, social service professionals doing all this work. You're engaging the community in this effort. Shared expertise, outside experts, we mental health professionals, social service professionals we provide assistance, but it's shared expertise, and it's local action and leadership across the board. And one of the principles that they found in the most successful work is that, again, somebody needs to put their screen on mute, if you would. Ensure that you have the community's support and invitation and permission to get through this, but then you engage the entire community, including representatives of individuals from every cultural and ethnic group, every minority, every marginalized organization and group and population, economic and social strata, and support from the helping systems, all of you out there. And then you identify themes and patterns across generations and community history, how this community and this population dealt with serious adversity or trauma before, what strengths do they have that help them do that? How can we bring those strengths into helping with the climate emergency? And then you help the community map out its resources, see what the strengths are, see what the resources are. You break down your strategy into specific goals. And then you also encourage community liaisons to become leaders. This is the LINK model by Dr. Landau. If you haven't seen it, it's a great model for community resilience. It's the LINK model, L-I-N-K. You find these links in the community, the people that are grassroots leaders of marginalized groups, that lead different social networks, et cetera. And they are really the people to bring into the process. Now, this approach builds resilience after a disaster occurs. But as with the climate emergency now likely everywhere at any time, population-based community level resilience initiatives now need to be organized everywhere now. We need to get out front of this. We can't wait for the next big disaster and then say, oh, let's bring people together. We really want to get this going now, which is why we focused on the policy. So here's the elements of the policy, then I'll get into the specific legislative asks. We created what we call the Wheel of Change for building community wellness and resilience, and we're gonna walk through this wheel. And the reason we created it as a Wheel of Change is what you wanna do is keep the wheel moving. And so you can pretty much start anywhere in the wheel, but you want to make sure that all of the parts of the wheel are strong enough so that you don't start rolling forward and one part's weak and you end up with a flat, if you will, and you stop the progress that it makes. So we're going to walk through these steps now. But first, let me say that again, that the ITRC climate change, mental wellness, and resilience policy. And by the way, when we go public, when we talk about the policy with legislators, we don't add climate change. We just talk about mental wellness and resilience policy because it applies to a lot of different adversities. But in many communities, think about your community, your neighborhood, or state. Personally and socially and ecologically harmful responses to adversity have, in many cases, been institutionalized. And so ongoing education, practice, and support are really going to be needed to transform these old habits and build safe, healthy, just, and resilient responses to adversities. And we need to create space for that at the personal and collective transformation. And this requires an enabling infrastructure, something that supports this effort over the long term. And that's what the policy is aimed to do. So the first step, once you get going on this, is to organize what we call a resilience coordinating council in every community. And the goal is to bring the entire system together in the community. It can be done at the neighborhood level also, or at the regional level if it's smaller communities spread out in a rural area. And what this means is people representing every population in the community or the region, including, as you can see, the whole list of folks below. And that this group co-creates and implements and tries to continually improve very innovative, age and culturally appropriate actions to build and sustain mental wellness and resilience. And every community program is going to be different because of the culture, because of the demographics, because of the age makeup of the community. But it's really critical that you get the whole system together. When you start off, you might not be able to get the whole system together, get half the system, so to speak, and show some progress, and others will start to join. But we're talking about civic groups from the YMCA and YWCA to United Way, to neighborhood leaders, religious and spiritual leaders, K through 12 and higher education leaders, business leaders, youth program leaders, climate and environmental groups, mental health professionals, all of us on the line, social justice and equity groups and on. Bring them together and say, we need to prepare our community for the traumas and toxic stress pileups to come. Let's start doing this work together. And what you want to do then, we call this a ring team approach. You create a board or a steering committee. That's the inside circle, the neighborhood leader, business leader, mental health leader, all sorts of folks. They might elect a co-chair, an executive committee. But then there's all these sort of innovation teams working with different populations that stay connected to the steering committee or the board. So there, there's neighborhood people working with neighborhood groups around the community, and they stay connected to the board. And private sector mental wellness and resilience teams working with private businesses, grassroots, marginalized group leaders, youth innovation teams, social service innovation teams, etc. And you can spend more time looking at it. We can talk about it. So one of the first steps of that Resilience Coordinating Council, and let me also say, we're not stuck on this term. The community or the neighborhood can use any term it wants beyond Resilience Coordinating Council, but the emphasis is on resilience building, not on mental health treatment. It's on building mental wellness and resilience, and it's on coordination, bringing everybody together so you're not competing against each other for grants. You're not overlapping your services, and you're identifying gaps in services so that everybody is being assisted. You want to assess how the community has responded to the past and existing adversities, do some assessment of what the already existing and future climate disasters and stresses are going to be for the community, assess the local strengths, the group, population, and community strengths, and the obstacles to using those strengths, and put them into a framework that then you develop a strategy from that, and you create a vision and goals and a strategy for building population level mental wellness and resilience. And I want to emphasize again, this is not focusing just on the most vulnerable populations. It's focusing on everyone, helping all adults and all youth learn mental wellness and resilience skills. And again, you can go back and learn more of this. I've asked Dan to send the slides out to you afterwards so you can have these and look over in more detail. And then one of the keys, done in their own unique ways in each community, is to educate everyone, basically, and help everyone become trauma informed and learn mental wellness and resilience information and skills. So you want to support the existing adult resilience education programs and start new ones. Same thing with youth. And you want to do public education and media campaigns. Here's how to take care of yourself. Here's what self-care means, et cetera, in the midst of adversities. Educational forums, community cafes, conferences, workshops, webinars, et cetera. You want to make sure over time that every adult and youth learns basic, simple, self-administrable mental wellness and resilience information and skills. And much of that is just becoming trauma informed. Next, then you want to focus on, in that education, and what we call the presencing information and skills. You want to help people normalize the feelings they have by showing that they are natural and caused by these external conditions. You can talk about the neuropsychology of trauma and toxic stress in simple terms. You want to teach people skills to calm their mind, body, and emotions. And you want to emphasize the importance of individual community rituals and ceremonies to help with that, including help with grieving. But also, as we said, purposing information and skills. Again, use your terms that resonate locally. You don't have to use presencing and purposing. But helping people find out how to turn towards adversities and learn from them rather than denying them or dissociating, et cetera. Help people clarify the core values they want to live by in the midst of adversity, and then help people learn how to find new sources of meaning, direction, and hope in life, and help them understand that the most powerful way to do that is to help other people move beyond their own self-interest, help other people, help pets or animals, or help restore the climate and natural environment. But you also, a second major emphasis has got to be building and strengthening and connecting social support networks across the neighborhood, across the community, because as we know, these healthy human connections are really what prevent mental health and psychosocial problems, and they're also vital to provide practical assistance, information, and access to key resources in emergencies. So we talk about, using Daniel Traig's focus, bonding, bridging, and linking social support networks. We can talk about that more down the road, but you really want to focus on helping people make those connections or rebuild them if they don't have them. And you want to then empower all the residents to take responsibility for enhancing and sustaining mental wellness and resilience. This comes out of the Neighborhood Empowerment Program in San Francisco, as well as the program in Israel and other places. And I hope that nothing I've shared with you so far, it sounds completely new. This is all going on across the US and across the world in different ways in different areas. Again, we've just combined it into a policy. So you want to help neighborhood groups learn how to host resilience hubs or pods that connect local neighbors to each other and allow people to provide support to each other and information. You want to help local neighborhoods learn how to identify and counter unhealthy, unsafe, and unjust cultural norms, how to share mental wellness and resilience information, how to go out and find people in their community that might be struggling and assist them. The neighborhood, or have phone numbers, or have emails. Maybe they're out of food. It might be they're single or alone on their own. And again, organize regular neighborhood rituals, etc. And as you work on all of those efforts, educating everyone, building social support networks, really working at the neighborhood level to really build that capacity for people to help each other maintain and sustain mental wellness and resilience. You want to continually evaluate, learn, and improve what you've been doing by measuring and evaluating progress, working with local universities and others to do that. And also, you got to advocate for funding and other resources that are needed to enhance and sustain the initiative. And then while you're doing that, the last step is to begin to embed the practices and the policies in local organization and government policies and practices. A number of organizations do that already. You have local organizations sign an MOU that they will incorporate mental wellness and resilience building initiatives into their effort. You want to try to get local public policies and state policies enacted, like the one we're about to talk about. So imagine the benefits of organizing a resilience coordinating council in your community. Imagine what would happen had this been in place before the COVID pandemic or before a major disaster, where it's Hurricane Harvey or the wildfires, et cetera. What would have been the benefits of having this in place and teaching the people these skills, giving them these resources, bringing people together and building population level mental wellness and resilience? As I said, this kind of program was not, this kind of policy and approach was not created just for the climate emergency. We simply took the most successful components that we saw and wove them together into this framework. Although again, the best one that almost mirrors this is the Israel Trauma-Informed Trauma Coalition's approach. But again, they're not focused on climate change. So this will help if we organize resilience coordinating councils or whatever you want to call them in every community. We're going to help with all sorts of human-caused emergencies like school violence, ACEs, racism, and other systemic oppressions, and non-climate related natural disasters. Again, as if we had them for the pandemic, it would have been great. Earthquakes, tsunamis, et cetera. All the while greatly reducing the demands on and cost of mental health, disaster mental health, and other kind of programs. So what are the legislative actions needed to enact this? So we spent a lot of time with our team of 20, talking about these, and the ITRC National Steering Committee about these issues. And there's no policy that we found that you can actually amend to just do this. So we decided that the best approach is to next Congress to enact a new Mental Wellness and Resilience Act. And it will call for organizing resilience coordinating councils in communities or regions nationwide with the goals and methods previously described. And the Mental Wellness and Resilience Act will allocate funding and authorize SAMHSA to distribute the funds through either their block grants or discretionary grants to the states or to local communities. But it's specifically designed for these community-based programs, population level-based programs. But and we're talking with a number of House and Senate members. There's one House member and one Senate member, I don't want to use their names now, that I think are right on the edge of potentially introducing this bill, this Congress, to get the ball rolling, and then we can hit the ground running next Congress. We'll see. I think it's 50-50, probably a little less than 50-50, but one House member in particular might be even beyond 50-50. We'll see what happens. It's all the political issues going on today makes it tough for them to figure out what to do. And we also then might simply get a resolution introduced as a backup, which would be, you know, a small start. But at the same time, in case we don't get anything from Congress, and I won't bet on that, that we're going to, states and local governments should enact their own Mental Wellness and Resilience Act, locally tailored mental wellness and resilience policies with locally developed funding streams. And it could be the funding streams, if you can get the federal legislation, they can use the block grants or discretionary grants, but also go to local foundations, local private donors, corporations and other businesses, and create local funding pools that local programs can apply to in some way. But at the federal level, we're also calling for the Department of Health and Human Services to establish an Office of Community-Based Population-Level Mental Wellness and Resilience. Again, an office and a focus in the policy as a whole is focused on building resilience and mental wellness, not just on treating symptoms of pathology, which is really what SAMHSA and these programs still do. We've got to flip it around and start focusing on how do we help prepare people for what's coming. So the office would establish an advisory committee to oversee mental wellness and resilience building policies and provide guidance to the office. Many of you might end up on the advisory committee, some of you. They want to continue to refine the criteria for successful community-based population level mental wellness and resilience initiatives. And the office would oversee implementation, they would monitor, and they continue to evaluate the program nationwide. But states and regions and local governments should establish their own office of mental wellness and resilience, or program, whatever you want to call it, doesn't have to be called an office. And if we get a federal program in place to coordinate with federal programs, the federal office and other states. Health and Human Services, the new office should also then establish mental wellness and resilience learning labs. That is, places, programs that people come to learn about how to organize a resilience coordinating council and run these programs, but train the trainer programs, train the facilitator programs for local leaders that want to go back and start these programs, and a continual series of education and training programs to address issues that emerge as the programs unfold, and there's going to be a lot of them. But if we don't get that at the federal level, at the same time, regions, states, and local governments should establish their own learning labs. Let's establish programs that help local leaders learn how to facilitate and operate mental wellness and resilience building initiatives that are age and culturally appropriate. At the same time, the Health and Human Services Office of Community Mental Wellness and Resilience should establish a national network of coordinators located in different regions of the country to oversee the different local initiatives underway, help local leaders learn and improve and operate their initiatives and connect them together. So one in this community can be connected to the one in the state next door, and they begin to learn from each other and share information, et cetera. The coordinators would also monitor and evaluate how things are going. But again, if we don't get the federal policy, even if we do, states and regions should establish their own coordinators to assist local initiatives with similar issues. And finally, the Office of Health and Human Services, Office of Community Mental Wellness and Resilience should establish knowledge exchanges and resource laboratories, meaning places where people can go and deposit research that they've just completed, or tools that they found helpful, et cetera, so others can go and find it, basically an online library. And people can talk nationally to joint problem solve together and learn from each other. And again, states and regions should establish their own knowledge exchanges and resource libraries. So there's a summary of everything. I'm not going to go through it, but you can read it afterwards. But again, imagine the benefits of mental wellness and resilience building policies at the federal, state, and local level in the US and internationally. Wouldn't this be something? And if you like this proposal and support the policy, I would encourage you to make an organizational endorsement. We have over 50 current organizational endorsers that have endorsed the policy, including the American Public Health Association, Prevention Institute, Healthcare Without Harm, American Association of Community Psychiatry, ACEs Connection Network endorsed, Alliance for Healthy Nervous, Climate Psychology Alliance, the Wellbeing Trust just yesterday endorsed it, or you can just endorse it yourself, and you can go to our website to do that. So I'm going to stop there and just open it up to questions. Let's see, how do we do this?
So,
Jesse, do you want to facilitate that?
Yeah, sure. First of all, Bob, thank you. Tremendous presentation, a ton of great comments coming our way. So just thank you for this information. Thank you for the work you do. We are going to share the slides out. One question that I have for folks based off a question that I was asked is we generally don't make these videos public for the privacy of our participants, but if it would be okay with everybody, does anybody have any feelings against not letting this be public for any reason or another? If so, you can just chat it, just a question to ask. So I'll get the question started, Bob, if that's okay, and then others can fill in as time goes on. But have you started to look at what, if there are communities in Oregon that have resilience initiatives in place with the fires versus similar communities that don't have those initiatives in place? Are you looking at...
Somebody mute their phone and getting some background.
Can I show and share a TikTok that everybody has already seen and it went totally viral? But it's you in quarantine.
Agree, Jody.
And can you ask the question again?
Video. So
Yeah, so
I think when things
are you looking at different communities in Oregon or California that are impacted by the fires, some that have resilience
look at you.
initiatives in them and others that don't, and seeing what the differences in recovery from the disaster are?
Well, that would be a good thing to do. We're in the midst of the wildfires now, where I think that's something that has to happen afterwards. It would be helpful to do. We're even personally, we have fled our community to go to the coast, as I was telling you before, so that we out of the smoke. We've had the worst smoke, the most air quality in the world, apparently, the last week, and so people are still dealing with those issues here. I know where I live in the McKenzie Valley, up the McKenzie River in the Eugene, there is no resilience initiative up there, but there's a number of a number of community groups have come together to try to provide mental health support and psychosocial support to people impacted by the fires. But that's about all I know that's happening now. In fact, I was going to try to do that myself, but we had to leave. But I think that would be a very helpful thing to do, but it's going to and also keep in mind again that because these are sort of single event disasters that will end, while as climate change is just going to continue to get worse. As we first heard, most of the mental health and psychosocial problems are going to show up months or a year or two after the fires are done, and that's where we really want to know how effective it's really been. So it's something. It's a challenge we ought to do, but we haven't taken that step yet at all.
Can I once again ask someone to check and make sure you're muted? We're getting some background noise here.
And there are so many things going on and so many battles.
Bob, would you mind making me the host? Are you able to do that? Hey, that should get your screen off. Maybe I'll be able to manage muting
We
folks.
somehow lost the Zoom picture, and so Peg's trying to figure out where it is. We
Okay,
don't know how that happened.
that is fair. So while we figure that out, does anybody else have any other questions for Bob? We will be sharing the slides, so besides that.
Bob, the question that's puzzled me since we first talked is, how does your initiative mesh with all of the things CTIPP and the people on the phone are doing, focusing on trauma-informed programs?
Well, Dan, that's a great question, and as you and I have talked about, we've turned our video off. We're trying to figure out what happened to Zoom here, but that's the problem with using my own computer, my portable. Clearly, helping everyone become trauma informed is really central to building mental wellness and resilience. What we've mostly thought about, of course, is that people who help people who are traumatized should become trauma informed. What we're simply suggesting, based on what we've seen and in our work, is that have everyone become trauma informed, even those that are traumatized, so that they understand what's happening within them. And I think a lot of the programs do that already. And I know in my work, when I'm out working with groups, just helping people understand why they feel the stress in their body, et cetera, what's happening within them, really sometimes is all you need to help people calm their mind, body, and behavior. It's very powerful. But then I think going a step further, well, let me back up and say, and we know that when you have these kind of serious adversities, people become extremely stressed, as I said, and that can greatly aggravate ACEs. And so I think that's a real important thing, that climate change is going to already and is going to greatly aggravate ACEs. So I think we need to keep that in mind. Just focusing on ACEs alone, while very, very important, isn't going to address these broader traumas and toxic stress pileup. So I think we need to broaden that effort make those efforts more broadly. And then the final thing I'll say again is that I think the more we can join together and work on these issues together, and if we can really focus on some version of community-based population level resilience rather than just the people focused who seem to exhibit ACEs, symptoms of ACEs problems or likelihood, I think we'll deal with ACEs and a whole lot of other problems at the same time. So I think that's my thoughts, that I think there's a great deal of connection between the two approaches. And I just hope we can all work together to make this happen.
The CTIPP approach and the legislation we're drafting isn't just focusing resilience programs for those who show ACEs. It's really, because you can't pick out people, it's really designed to do it at a community level to the extent you can reach the community, doing it in the schools, doing it in adult programs, doing it in faith-based institutions to reach people where they are. But it sounds very similar. I mean, what I'm thinking is, though, for the purpose of the pandemic, what we've said is that people who suffered ACEs have their glass almost full to the top with stress hormones. And then you bring along a pandemic and the additional stress sends it over the top. And what I hear you saying is that climate change will do the same thing. So people who might be the most vulnerable are those who had ACEs, because they already have a high level of stress that climate change will add to. So we need to focus on that population. They are the ones who will show the results of the climate change most quickly. Are they the most vulnerable ones?
Well, there's a lot of ways to look at that, Dan. I think there's people who live in high-risk areas are also very vulnerable. Low-income populations are very vulnerable. The elderly are very vulnerable. There's a lot of more vulnerable populations. But what we've also seen is that in our work and with working with our members, is that that people that we can typically consider more the marginalized groups that we consider more vulnerable often are more resilient in some ways, because they've dealt with traumas and stresses throughout their whole lives. And we don't, I think we just have to rethink the whole concept of vulnerability when it comes to the climate emergency. That's not to say you don't focus on marginalized groups. We absolutely have to. But so, for example, everyone got burned out in Paradise, California. Not just it affected, not just the most vulnerable people. Everyone is getting burned out in the McKenzie River Valley here in Eugene. It's not affecting just some, it's affecting everyone. Now, some will have greater difficulty recovering, but it depends on whether their houses were destroyed, their businesses were destroyed, et cetera, et cetera. But I think we need to just be careful how we think about this. It's not just the most vulnerable, as much as build population level mental wellness and resilience, I think is really going to be critical. And we haven't even begun to see the impacts of the climate crisis. Once it gets above 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit, global temperatures rise, all bets are off.
We have a few questions in the chat, if you don't mind my asking them.
Sure.
So Julia wanted to know if you utilize HOPE, the healthy outcomes from positive experiences, and if you were including them and the 4 pillars in your initiative.
Again, I coordinate a network of ITRC members, including steering committee members, but many, many members around the world. Many of them undoubtedly use that model, that approach. But it depends on what their background is, what they think is appropriate in their community, et cetera. So I think it's a great model. I've used it myself occasionally, but it's really up to the ITRC members to decide what they want to use.
Gotcha. And the other question in there is, have you connected with systems of care?
A little bit, yeah. We've worked and talked with the folks involved with that, and we're just trying to get connected with everybody to share this information. So I haven't not personally worked with them on a project though.
Okay. And another question just came in from Marilyn. Is transformative resilience more of a community experience rather than a personal experience?
Transformational resilience, as we call it, it's actually both. That I think the community doesn't necessarily change as much until some individuals make this transformation and begin to speak out and encourage others to do the same thing. So it is really both, but I think it has to start at the personal level. In fact, you know, even as we look at climate change, how many of you that are listening in have assessed your carbon footprint in all ways? And so we start to sort of address so let's try to make the problem less worse now from ourselves. But doing stuff on our own is just not enough, clearly. We have to deal with the systems that are set up that are causing these problems and that leave us with very few options to deal with these issues. So we have to engage the entire community in that. But also the same thing is true with mental wellness and resilience. The more we can engage the broader community, the more support we personally have, and our families have, and vice versa. So I think both are really important, and transformational resilience is important at all levels, also at the family level and the organizational level, as well as the community.
That's great. Thank you.
Any other questions? Well, can't thank you enough, Bob. As some of the people on the call know, I, in the last 6 months, have gotten 2 grandchildren, and I look at them and I wonder what kind of world we're leaving them. And at times it gets depressing. Bob, I think you've given us a reason to be hopeful that there are solutions, and if we put our minds together and work together, we can actually offer those little babies some hope for the future. So thank you for your presentation, and thank you for all the great work you're doing. I want to call you Isaiah. You're the prophet. That's a lot of responsibility, so I won't do it, but you really have been talking about this issue long before it really started resonating, but you never quit, so thank you very much.
Well, you're welcome, and thank you for having me. I just want to leave you all with, if we really make an effort to this to sort of shift to a prevention focus, all sorts of really interesting positive things can happen. So I just want to encourage us all to really think in that way. Your grandchildren might end up actually better off. Thank you.
Great. I will tell them. They're only 6 months old, but I'll tell them.
Wait a few minutes.
It looks like before we sign off, though that was a great end note, looks like Carrie Sipp may have a question.
Right. Thank you so much, Bob. I know that your community on ACES Connection changed names a couple of months ago, and I thought I was a member of it, but what is the name of your community on ACES Connection?
I can't quite remember. I think it's called the Climate Trauma Program or something now.
Okay. It used to be IRTC, and I can remember it that way, but.
Right. That used to be the ITRC, but Jane actually asked me to change it, and so we did, and I think it's a Climate Trauma Program.
Okay, I'm looking for it right now. I'll put it in if I find it before we get finished.
Right.
And if not, Carrie, if you send that to me when I send out the slides and the recording, I'll add that as an ACES Connection page for folks to join as well.
Good deal. Thank you.
Thank you all.
And Bob, is your email on the chat list? Or?
No, I should put it on there.
Yeah.
But the best one is tr@trig-cli.org. I'll try to send this to
to everybody.
Okay, well, Bob's doing that. Thank everybody for joining us. A very sobering and informative and hopefully a motivating presentation. Just to remind you, our October CTIPP CAN call will deal with an equally important issue of the need for police reform and the role that trauma-informed science can play in that. It's going to be led by one of our stars, Becky Haas from Tennessee, who helped turn a police department into a trauma-informed institution, and then the rest of the city. She'll be joined by several police chiefs from Tennessee, and also Jesse and a group that he's working with on examining trauma-informed policing. So join us in October, and until then, have a safe and healthy month. Thank you all.